How you doing? And thank you for being our guest.
I'm doing great. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your story and everything that you've done and, where you are now?
Absolutely. Most people know me as a presentation coach or a speaking coach, but I actually didn't get my start as a professional speaker. I got my start as a professional magician and worked as a professional magician for 10 years. After that time, I decided I needed to get a real job, and I became a high school math teacher and taught math for 10 years. During that time, I picked up an advanced degree in how adults learn. And so when I'm helping someone who's running a business or trying to use speaking or communication or struggling to get the message out, I really bring two things to the table. The first is a little bit of stagecraft from my years of doing magic. And the second is a real understanding of how adults learn, how the person sitting across the table from you, or the person on the other end of the phone from you, or the person watching you on Zoom, how they are listening and what their brain is doing while they're listening. And so over the last 10 years, I've been fortunate to work with some of the greatest speakers in the world. I coach Damon John and Sharks from Shark Tank. I coach Grant Cardone and Michael Hyatt. I help Tony Robbins and Dean Graziosi on the KBB project. But most of the people that I work with are not professional speakers. Most of the people that I work with wouldn't even consider themselves speakers. Most of the people that I work with are entrepreneurs, people who've decided to start a new business, and they want to grow that business. And I believe if you've started a business or want to grow an existing business, the fastest way to grow that business or get that business to be revenue positive is to work on your communication skills and use speaking to grow your business. Whether you speak to one person at a time or 100 people at a time, communication and speaking is the fastest, most predictable way to grow any business.
That's so true. I think you cannot communicate your message and what you're trying to say, nobody's going to get any business that you start or any idea that you have. So that's super important. So how they start, how they get that clarity, where's the starting point?
The starting point is with two questions, I believe. There's two questions that you have to ask before you ever open your mouth or before you even plan what you're going to say. And everything that I talk about today will work if you have the opportunity to speak to a group of people. If you're on a webinar, if you're on a podcast, if you're on stage. But everything I talk about also works in one-on-one conversation. So a phone call. So in an Uber ride with someone, at a cocktail party or networking event, on a Zoom call, or across the table at Starbucks. We always start with two questions. We call these the clarity questions. Question number one, who is the audience that you're actually serving? Who is your ideal customer? And I know a lot of entrepreneurs who are like, this is going to be perfect for every living human being in the world. I'm the next Facebook. And that's great. I want you to get there one day, but you can't start there. You can't start with a big business. You have to start with a small business, and a small business has a niche audience. And so the first question is, who is that target audience in the beginning? I like to call it the lowest hanging fruit, and it's often a group that you belong to. So I was a public school teacher. The first group that I started serving when I started coaching people on their communication strategies were teachers. Why? Because I spoke their language, because they already trusted me, because I already knew a bunch of them. The second group was parents. Why? Because I am a parent. And so I already speak the language. I already know the words that they use. I already have credibility with them. And so I would ask everybody listening to this, who is your lowest hanging fruit? And I think the place to start looking for that is often the audience that you already belong to, a group that you already belong to. The second clarity question after who is the audience that you serve is, what is the problem that you solve for them? And when I ask most business owners, what is the problem that you solve? Most business owners don't give me a problem. They give me a solution. When I ask a financial advisor, what is the problem that you solve? They say, a better retirement. Well, better retirement's not a problem. It's actually a good thing. When I ask health coaches, what is the problem that you solve for your audience? They'll often say healthy eating. And I'll say, well, healthy eating is not a problem. It's a good thing. What is the problem that you solve? And here's the hardest thing to do. The hardest thing to do is to actually state the problem in the language of the consumer, not the language of the expert. If you're watching this, you're probably thinking about starting a business, or you're looking into starting a business, or you already have started a business, or you just want something more. And eventually you're going to be an expert, or you already are an expert in something. Now, the hardest thing for any expert to do is to remember what words they used to use to describe the problem before they became so smart, before they had a solution to that problem. But if you can do that, if you can describe the problem that you solve in the language of somebody who still has the problem, and you know exactly who you solve it for, if you have those two things, I actually think it's pretty easy to put together your communication to grow your business. If you are fuzzy on those things, or you're still working on those two questions, I think it's really hard to put together communication to grow your business, because you're going to be all over the place with your communication. So who is the audience that you serve, and what is the problem that you solve for them?
Yes, I agree. And it sounds simple, but it's not. And you put it clear. And, people, we have to start with ourselves. Because usually sometimes the problem that we solve is our own problem. And getting that message is super important. So is there tools, is there a course that you can take that can help you answer those questions that you need to start with?
Well, one of the most important things to do when you're putting together any communication is have a great story. And you mentioned, the problem that you're solving for your audience is often a problem that you have. And if the problem that you solve for your audience is a problem that you have, we know exactly what story you should tell. You should tell the story of you having this problem and you solving this problem. And so we use a 3-part story structure for that. The 3 parts of your story that you should be telling every single day to everybody you meet, to every audience you have. There's 3 parts. There's a before, a pivot, and an after. The before is what your life was like when you still had the problem. Only spend 60 seconds describing this, but spend 60 seconds describing what your life was like before. The pivot is when things change. You get 30 seconds to tell us how things change. Did you read a book? Did you go to a conference? Did you have an awakening one day? What happened? Did you hit rock bottom? What happened? And then the third thing is the after. You get 60 seconds to describe the after. What is your life like after? So let's say you start a business helping people with their anxiety. You're starting this business because you used to have anxiety and you don't want other people to have that same anxiety. So you're passionate about it. You're excited about this business. You know your audience. It's going to be people just like me, whether those are veterans or people in the military or military spouses, whoever it is. You have an audience and they have anxiety. What is the problem that you solve for them? Anxiety. That's the problem that you solve. They have anxiety. They don't want to have anxiety. What story should you tell? 60 seconds about what your life was like when you had anxiety. I didn't sleep well at night. I often ate to cover up my nervousness, and I was worried all the time. I had health problems. I had high blood pressure and I was grinding my jaw, so I had TMJ. 60 seconds. Then the pivot. Then one day I said, I can't live the rest of my life like this. And I got to figure this out. So I read every book I could. I attended classes. I learned what the very best people in the world were doing for their anxiety, and I got this. Now the after. Today, instead of not sleeping at night, I sleep very well at night. Instead of eating to overcome my anxiety and nervousness, I don't have anxiety and nervousness. And instead of grinding my teeth, I'm happy to say that I don't grind my teeth anymore. My TMJ has gone away and my blood pressure is down 20 points. There's the story. That's the story you want to tell. Before, pivot, after. If the before is what your audience is struggling with and the after is what they want, they will pay you for the pivot. Whether you're talking to one person or 100 people, if the before has them going like this, oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. If the after has them going like this, oh, I want some of that. Why can't I be more like you? Then they will pay you for the pivot. I think the hardest things for a lot of people to do is to remember their stories. A lot of people have great stories. They have stories of when they struggled. They have stories of when they've solved that struggle. They have all these stories. For years, I struggled to remember my stories, to keep track of my stories. I would jot them down on Post-it notes and cocktail napkins. I would have this folder filled with little notes, little pieces of paper and scraps of paper of when funny things would happen or when I would remember something that happened from my childhood. And they were just all over the place. They were just on little scraps of paper. And then someone gave me a story journal, one place to keep track of all of my stories. And it was great. I filled that story journal with stories. The problem was the story journal wasn't always with me. The story journal was sometimes at home when I was in the car and something would pop into my head. Or sometimes I would be at work and my story journal would be at home. And so I jotted down my stories on a Post-it note or a cocktail napkin or the back of a receipt. And I jammed them into my story journal. And my story journal started out this thick and it ended up like this thick because it had so many pieces of paper jammed between the paper. I was one strong gust of wind away from losing all of my stories. And I said, why isn't there one place to store all of your stories? Why isn't there a place in the cloud to do this? And I looked all over for it and I could not find it. So I made one. I think this is so important that I went out and I made a solution. I created a tool called StoryLink, StoryLink.com. And StoryLink.com is one place in the cloud where you can store all of your stories. It's always with you because you're either at your computer or you have your phone. Anytime something happens, anytime you remember something that should be a great story or you should be able to tell that story, you can record it at StoryLink.com. The beauty of StoryLink.com is that it organizes your stories into different types of stories. Stories to get to know you, stories to teach your content, stories to sell your products. And anytime you have to give a presentation or communicate on the phone, on Zoom, across the table at Starbucks, you could just go into StoryLink and pick the stories you want to tell and push one button and it prints out your script, your presentation, your outline for the phone call. It prints it for you. It takes the process of writing a presentation or scripting a phone call from hours down to minutes. And the best part is I'm right there with you. Every time you're typing in a story, you have targeted video teaching from me telling you how to tell that story the very best way. So if you are someone who tells a lot of stories, but you can't keep them straight, this is for you. If you're someone who has stories, but you don't know how to tell them and you don't feel like you're a good storyteller or a good talker or a good, I'm an introvert, so I get it. I understand that it's hard to talk to other people. It makes me very nervous. That's why I want a tool to help me, and StoryLink.com can be the tool. And the good news is we've got a special free trial for everybody who's listening to this. When you go to StoryLink.com, StoryLink.com, and when you register, if you use the discount code FOUNDERS, 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 you'll get 30 days free to try the tool. You can enter your stories, see if it works for you. If you like it, you can keep using it. If you don't like it, you can cancel at any time and not get charged. But you get a 30-day free trial of StoryLink.com and see if it's for you. It has changed the way I tell stories because I don't lose stories now. I keep track of my stories. They're organized. They're saved for all time. I will never lose them, all because of StoryLink.com.
And that's amazing that you were able to create a place where we can keep our stories. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
You know, I think anybody that's listening, they should definitely check it out and start writing down the stories, because that's, once you write it down, that's where everything
It's
starts.
so important at the beginning of a business
Built
or in
from
the early stages of a business to remember your stories. Every business has a founding story. Like I just told you the founding story for StoryLink. I looked around for a solution and I couldn't find one, so I made one. Other businesses have, I took what I learned in this industry and applied it to this industry. I imagine a lot of the listeners of this I took what I learned while I was in the military and thought, could I apply that to this problem outside the military? Or could I apply that to another group of people who are solving the same problem? And I did, and it worked. That's a great founder story. That's a story people can get behind and fall in love with. And then once you have a business, you have customers, and you want to save their stories too. You have this customer that came in and had this problem, and here's how they worked with you, and now they don't have that problem. Whether that was if you fix roofs. I remember Marianne had a leaking roof and she couldn't get it fixed. Somebody took a lot of her money and still didn't fix it. But then we went out and looked at it. We recognized the problem wasn't on top of the roof. It was more underneath in the attic. We fixed it, and 2 weeks later, that problem was solved. Today, Marianne has had the same roof for 2 years, hasn't had a leak once, and she loves living in the home that she was considering selling at one point just because she couldn't fix the roof. That's a great story. That's got a before, a pivot, which is working with you, and an after. So you have to capture both the founder's story, which is your story as you start the business and why you started it and how you started it. And then you have to capture those customer stories, which are going to help other customers see social proof and have testimonials. You have to capture all these stories. The lifeblood of a business, the best marketing tool any business has are the stories that it tells. And I think one of the things, some people are good with numbers and some people are bad with numbers. Like some people are really good with the profit and the loss and the margins and all that stuff that makes my head hurt. I'll tell you the number that you should know about your business. Here's the most important number in your business. How many times each week are you telling the story of your business? And there's 7 days in this week, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I checked. There's 7 days this week. You should set a goal. I want to tell my story 7 times this week. And if it gets to Friday and you haven't told your story 7 times, well, then you're going to be working this weekend. And you're going to be working over the weekend because you got to find people to tell your story to. I don't care whether that's on Facebook Live. I don't care whether you have to go to Starbucks and meet them. I don't care whether you have to join some Facebook group or go find people to tell your story to. Walk your dog and bump into somebody and tell them your story. If you don't tell your story 7 times a week, are you really trying to grow your business? This is the metric. This is the thing you should measure. How many times this week did I tell the story of my business to new people? And the higher that number is, the faster your business is going to grow.
That's so true. Because every time you tell your story, you realize the impact it has, and it grows and grows. And you find the words to really say the story of what you're trying to say. Because sometimes we think it, but we don't say it. The translation, it gets lost.
Oh, it always sounds better in my head than when I say it out loud. And in the beginning, that's exactly how it's going to be. Here, the number one reason why most people don't tell their story? Number one reason why most people don't tell their story is it's not perfect yet. Well, if you never tell it, it's never going to get perfect. That's like if Michael Jordan would have said, I'm not going to play basketball because it's not perfect yet. It got perfect because he played basketball all the time. And that's same is true with your storytelling. The first time you tell your story, it's going to be ugly. Second time you tell your story, you're going to fumble around and mix up the words. The third time you tell your story, you'll probably forget it halfway through. That's okay. Keep telling your story, because the 5th time you tell it, the 10th time you tell it, the 100th time you tell it, it's going to get better and better and better. And I know this, everybody listening to this is going to have a meeting. They're going to have an opportunity. I remember the first time I met Tony Robbins. First time I met Tony Robbins, I was in his studio in Miami. And I was standing in the studio, and all of a sudden the sun went under. Like, he came in the doorway and the whole room got darker because he filled the whole doorway. He's mammoth. He's like huge. He's like 7 feet tall. I'm tall. I'm like over 6 feet tall, and he's like much bigger than me and much wider than me. And I walked up to him, and he stuck out his hand to shake my hand. Now, I have a big hand, but his hand is like mammoth compared to my hand. Like, he took my little paw in his hand and he shook my hand. And then he looked at me, and he looks right in my eyes, like so intense, so deep. And he says, "I don't know your story. Tell me about you." And there it is. There's the opportunity. I have the opportunity to tell Tony Robbins my story. And here's what I hope for every single person listening to this, because you're going to have an opportunity. It might not be with Tony Robbins, but it'll be with somebody who can open doors for you. It'll be with somebody who can refer business to you. It can be with somebody who can become your biggest customer, who can spend thousands of dollars on you. And when that person shakes your hand and says, "I don't know your story. Tell me about you," I hope it's not the first time you're telling that story. I hope over the last year that you've told that story hundreds of times and messed it up 100 different ways. I hope you've told it terribly and badly and poorly and mediocrely and okay and pretty good and good, so that when that person shakes your hand and says, "Tell me about you," that you tell it perfectly, because you have practiced it and practiced it and practiced it, not in the mirror, but to live human beings. Because I think everybody who's listening to this is going to get an opportunity with what I call a connector or a door opener or a champion. And when I say tell your story 7 times a week, a lot of those people are never going to become customers, but they might know a customer. A lot of those people might never spend money on you, but they might recommend it to their brother, who will spend money on you. A lot of those people aren't in your target audience, but they have family members. They have friends who are in your target audience. So just keep telling your story. You will get better and better and better at it, and more people will hear your message and learn about your business.
Yes, that was perfect. I believe practice makes perfect. So repeating it will get you there.
Absolutely.
Are you ready to be an entrepreneur? Entrepreneurs are confident, positive, creative, resourceful, and resilient people who are faced with problems and they create solutions. If this sounds like you, tune in to Founders Time to learn more and start your journey.
What else? You share so much value already, but recommend starting a book or a tool besides checking out StoryLink that you recommend that they should look out for?
I think one of the most important things that anyone can do is understand how people are listening to you and how people are learning from you. Every time you open your mouth to speak, there's something going on in the person who's sitting across the table or on the other end of the phone. And so really understanding what motivates people and how people are listening to you makes a lot of sense. There's one book that has been foundational in my development and learning that, and that's a book by Robert Cialdini called Influence. Influence helps you understand how the person who you're speaking to will make their decisions, whether they decide to like you or not like you, whether they decide to follow your direction or not follow your direction, whether they decide to trust you or not trust you, and ultimately whether they decide to become a customer of yours or not become a customer of yours. And so that book I read through about every 6 months or so. One of the things that's talked about a lot in that book, and you need to understand in that book is the idea of what causes people to make their decisions the way that they do. And I spend a lot of time working with people as I coach them and working with people as I help them, trying to figure out what motivates your audience. And is it your title? Is it your resume? Is it your past experience? And one of the things that we know is that what causes people to do business with you is often nothing to do with what degree you have or what diplomas are on your shelf or on your wall. It's a connection, a different connection. You have kids, I have kids. You lived in Texas, I lived in Texas. You were in the military, I was in the military. It's a connection like that. You cheer for this football team, I cheer for that football team. It's the little things. We call these connection points. And this is another reason why the storytelling that you do can't just be about your customers and can't just be about your expertise in your business. The storytelling that you do has to be personal, because when people make the decision to do business with somebody else, the first thing that connects them to that person is often how they make the decision. And that could be your mention that you go to a certain type of church and they went to that certain type of church. That could be that you grew up in this place and they grew up in that place. Or it could be that you moved around a lot and they moved around a lot. It's those connection points that cause us not just to like someone and not just to think that they're really smart, because there's going to be a lot of people who think that you're really smart, but they don't want to do business with you. But when you have this other connection point, and that's only found by telling personal stories, it's only found by exposing appropriate parts of your story to the audience, to the person you're speaking to. And again, this works. You know, some of you are going to have an opportunity to stand up in someone's living room and present to 4 people at once. Some of you are going to be on a Zoom call and be able to present to 6 or 7 people at once, or even 20 people at once. But most people grow their business and start their business by speaking to one person at a time, but they're just relentless about it. And each time you speak to somebody, you should be thinking, how can I connect with them? What do I have in common with them? And by the way, when you're talking to them, here's how you know you hit it. The moment you hit it, they will start nodding their heads and leaning into you. It works across the table at Starbucks and it works on Zoom. You can see it in both situations. They'll start not. So when you say, yeah, I grew up in Wisconsin, and if they grew up in Wisconsin, they're going to be like, I grew up in Wisconsin. They'll be nodding their heads and leaning into you. If you say, you know, my parents got divorced when I was like in 4th grade. If they're a child of divorce and their parents got divorced, you know, when they were in elementary school, they're going to be like, I know exactly what that's like. They'll be nodding and leaning in with you. And I'm telling you, if you get that, they will do business with you, because now they are emotionally connected. Your story is their story, and they're going to become a customer. If they're in your target audience and they have the problem that you solve, they're going to become a customer because they have an emotional connection to you. It's more important than being the smartest person in the room. It's more important than being the best speaker in the room. And it's more important than having the best product. There's a lot of times we don't buy the best product, use the best provider, go with the smartest person. And we say things like, you know, I didn't feel a connection. You know, I trusted this person. You know, I just felt like this was the right person for me to do business with. And that's because we connected with them. And so I think you should think as you go through your stories, what is the story that would connect with the person I'm speaking to today? I'm speaking to someone who has kids and their kids are just getting ready to go to college. Oh, I should tell a story about driving my daughter to college and how I cried all the way home. That'd be the perfect story. Like, that's the connection story for that person. It might not be tomorrow, but that's the connection story today. So the book is Influence by Robert Cialdini. And one of the points in the book is how important that personal life is.
Thank you so much. I'm getting it today. So where people can find you, they want to learn more about you, storylink.com.
Best place to learn more about me is at storylink.com, STORYLINQ.com. You can sign up for a free 30-day trial there if you use the discount code FOUNDERS, and you'll get a ton of video teaching from me on exactly how to put together a presentation, how to tell your opening story, how to use speaking to grow your business. It's also a tool that can allow you to save, capture, and organize your stories. It's at storylink.com. Use the discount code FOUNDERS, FOUNDERS.
Well, thank you so much for being my guest speaker. It was an honor. Anytime.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. My final words of advice to everybody is just keep telling your stories. Tell them again, and tell them again. When you tell your story, other people realize they're not alone in what they're struggling with. When you tell your story, other people realize that there are real solutions and you can help them solve this problem. And when you tell your story, other people know that there is hope. So just keep telling your story.
There's hope. That's all we need. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.